A routine traffic stop turned into a nightmare when two officers handcuffed Lieutenant General Michelle Williams without checking her military ID. They laughed as they dismissed her warnings about protocol until she made one phone call. What happened next would end their careers in less than 24 hours. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. The rain fell in heavy sheets across the windshield of Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell's sedan as she guided it carefully along the slick streets of Arlington. The digital clock on her dashboard read 10:37 p.m. She was later than she'd planned, having stayed at the Pentagon long after most of her colleagues had departed, wrestling with logistics for an upcoming deployment that couldn't wait until morning. 27 years in the United States Army had taught her that preparation saved lives. As the highest-ranking black woman in the armed forces and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Plans, and Training, Vanessa carried the weight of thousands of soldiers' futures in every decision she made. Tonight was no different, even if it meant driving home through a punishing spring storm. She squinted through the blur of rain, noticing the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Checking her speedometer, she was 5 miles under the limit. She signaled and eased toward the curb, coming to a careful stop. Probably just rushing past to an emergency, she thought. But the patrol car pulled in behind her. Vanessa sighed, reaching for her purse to retrieve her license. A routine stop, nothing to worry about. She'd been pulled over twice before in her life, both times for actual infractions. The encounters had been professional, if mildly annoying. She rolled down her window, the cool rain immediately misting her face as she waited for the officer to approach. Officer James Connolly was 26 months into his career with the Arlington Police Department, still eager to prove himself to the veterans on the force. When he'd spotted the late-model sedan moving slowly through the wealthy neighborhood, something didn't sit right. He'd followed for 3 blocks before deciding to run the plates. While waiting for dispatch to respond, he'd hit the lights. "License and registration, please," he said, leaning down to peer into the window, his flashlight beam sweeping across the car's interior before settling uncomfortably on Vanessa's face. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" Vanessa's tone was polite but direct, her military bearing evident even in the confines of her vehicle. Connolly hesitated. "Your vehicle matches the description of one involved in a reported disturbance nearby." This wasn't exactly true. Dispatch had yet to confirm anything about the vehicle, but it was a response he'd found useful in similar situations. "I see," Vanessa said, maintaining eye contact as she handed over her documentation. "I'm just heading home from work." Connolly examined her license, noting the Pentagon address listed under employer. His radio crackled to life, and he stepped away from the car to respond, the rain plastering his uniform to his shoulders as he spoke in hushed tones. Vanessa waited patiently, watching through her side mirror as a second patrol car pulled up. Her heart rate ticked up slightly. 2 units for a routine traffic stop seemed excessive. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had nothing to worry about. Officer Ryan Dawson joined his colleague, huddling close as they conversed out of Vanessa's earshot. At 34, Dawson had 8 years on the force and a reputation for being thorough. Some community members would say overzealous, in high-end neighborhoods. "System's running slow tonight," Dawson said, glancing toward the sedan. "Get anything back on the plates?" "Not yet," Connolly admitted. "Says she works at the Pentagon." Dawson's eyebrows raised. "Yeah? And I'm the Secretary of Defense." He chuckled. "This neighborhood's had 3 break-ins this month. Let's just be careful." Connolly nodded, returning to Vanessa's window. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Vanessa's expression remained composed, though her mind raced. "Officer, may I ask why that's necessary? I've provided my identification, and I'm not aware of any traffic violation." "Please step out of the vehicle, ma'am," Connolly repeated, his tone hardening. "It's for our safety and yours." Recognizing the potential for escalation, Vanessa complied, opening her door slowly and stepping into the rain. Her charcoal suit, tailored to her athletic frame and adorned with the subtle insignia of her rank, was immediately dampened by the downpour. "Place your hands on the hood of the car," Dawson instructed, moving closer. "Officers, I'm Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell, Deputy Chief of Staff at the Pentagon," she stated calmly, making no move toward the hood. "If there's a problem with my documentation, hands on the vehicle now." Dawson's voice rose sharply, his right hand moving to rest on his holster. Vanessa's military training took over. She recognized the volatile situation and carefully placed her palms on the wet metal of her car hood. "I'd like to know what this is about," she said, her voice steady despite the rain now soaking through her clothes. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Connolly explained, moving to pat down her sides. "Your vehicle matches a description." "What description?" Vanessa pressed. "I've owned this car for 3 years. I drive it to and from the Pentagon daily." Neither officer responded as Dawson circled to the passenger side, shining his flashlight through the windows. "What's in the briefcase?" he called out, spotting her leather attaché case on the passenger seat. "Classified military documents," Vanessa replied truthfully. "I have the proper clearance, which you can verify with—" "Turn around," Connolly interrupted, taking her arm to guide her movement. Vanessa complied, facing the officers directly, rain streaming down her face. The absurdity of the situation was beginning to transition from annoying to concerning. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but this has gone far enough. I've identified myself, and you can easily verify my position." Dawson's radio crackled. He turned away to listen, then approached Connolly, speaking in a lowered voice. "Dispatch says the system's back up. No hits on the vehicle." Instead of ending the encounter, however, Connolly seemed to double down. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us to the station to sort this out." "That's completely unnecessary," Vanessa stated firmly. "Call my office at the Pentagon. They can confirm everything I've told you." "It's after hours," Dawson countered, "and we can't just take your word for it." "I'm not getting in your patrol car," Vanessa said, her patience wearing thin. "I've cooperated fully, provided identification, and explained my situation. There are no grounds for detaining me." The tension escalated rapidly. Connolly reached for his handcuffs. "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous," Vanessa stated, remaining still. "I want to speak to your supervising officer immediately." "Last warning," Dawson said, moving closer. "Comply or you'll be charged with resisting." In that moment, Vanessa made a split-second decision. She could continue to resist what was clearly an unlawful detention, potentially creating a dangerous situation, or she could comply now and address the injustice through proper channels later. Her military career had been built on strategic thinking, even in the face of personal indignity. "I am complying under protest," she said clearly, turning and placing her hands behind her back. "And I want both of your badge numbers." The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists with a definitive click. The 3-star general who had commanded thousands of troops and coordinated military operations across continents was being detained in the rain by 2 local police officers who couldn't be bothered to verify her identity. As they guided her toward the patrol car, a vehicle slowed on the opposite side of the street. Through the downpour, Vanessa recognized her neighbor, Congressman James Wilson, peering out his window in disbelief at the scene unfolding before him. "General Mitchell?" he called out, pulling his car to a stop and emerging with an umbrella. "What's happening here?" The officers exchanged glances as the congressman approached, his presence altering the dynamic instantly. "Congressman Wilson," Vanessa acknowledged, standing tall despite the handcuffs and the rain plastering her uniform to her skin. "These officers seem to believe I'm someone else. Perhaps you can help clarify the situation." The night had taken an unexpected turn, but Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell knew one thing with absolute certainty. By tomorrow morning, the rain would have stopped, but the storm was just beginning. Congressman James Wilson was not a man who typically ventured out in stormy weather at nearly 11 o'clock at night, but his chief of staff had couriered over documents requiring his immediate attention. As chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Wilson took his responsibilities seriously, especially when they concerned upcoming appropriations. He hadn't expected to witness one of the Pentagon's highest-ranking officers being handcuffed in the rain less than a block from his own home. "Officers," Wilson said, his authoritative voice cutting through the downpour, "I can personally vouch for General Mitchell. She's my neighbor and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the Pentagon." Officer Dawson straightened his posture, immediately recognizing the congressman from local news coverage. "Sir, with all due respect, we're conducting an investigation into suspicious activity in the neighborhood." Wilson's expression hardened. "And that investigation requires handcuffing a 3-star general? Release her immediately." Officer Connolly hesitated, looking to his partner for guidance. The presence of a U.S. congressman had dramatically altered the situation's dynamics, but he was reluctant to admit a potential mistake. "We're following department protocol," Connolly insisted, though his confidence had visibly faltered. "The system was down, and we couldn't verify her identity." "Then verify it now," Wilson demanded, holding his umbrella over Vanessa, a futile gesture given how thoroughly soaked she already was. "Or shall I call Chief Martinez directly? I have him on speed dial." The mention of their chief had the desired effect. Dawson muttered something into his radio while Connolly maintained his position beside Vanessa, who stood dignified despite the circumstances. "This isn't necessary, Congressman," Vanessa said quietly, water dripping from her chin. "I can handle this." "I have no doubt you can, General," Wilson replied, not taking his eyes off the officers. "But this isn't something you should have to handle. Not in our neighborhood. Not in any neighborhood." A tense minute passed before Dawson returned, his expression carefully neutral. "We've received confirmation, sir. There appears to have been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," Wilson repeated, his tone making it clear he considered it something far more serious. "Remove those handcuffs." Connolly produced the key and unlocked the restraints. Vanessa brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrists, more from the symbolic relief than any actual discomfort. "I'll need my license and registration back," she said evenly to Connolly, who quickly retrieved them from his pocket. "Ma'am, we apologize for the inconvenience," Dawson offered mechanically, avoiding direct eye contact. "We were responding to reports of suspicious activity and—" "Save it," Wilson interrupted. "You can explain yourselves to Chief Martinez tomorrow. I'll be filing a formal complaint first thing in the morning." Vanessa raised a hand. "Officers, I understand you believed you were doing your job." Her tone was professional, despite the indignity she had suffered. "But I hope this serves as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that extending basic courtesy and thorough verification before escalating to detention might be prudent in the future." The officers seemed unsure how to respond to her measured reaction. They had expected anger, threats, or demands for retribution, not this calm assessment delivered with the precision of a military briefing. "Yes, ma'am," Connolly managed, his earlier bravado replaced by evident discomfort. "You're free to go, General," Dawson added unnecessarily. "I should hope so," Wilson muttered. Vanessa nodded to both officers, then turned to the congressman. "Thank you for your intervention, though I'm certain this would have been resolved eventually." "Eventually isn't good enough," Wilson replied. "Not for you, not for anyone." They watched as the officers returned to their vehicles, conferring briefly before driving away, their red and blue lights no longer flashing. The rain continued unabated, drumming against the roof of Vanessa's sedan and the congressman's umbrella. "I'll follow you home," Wilson said, gesturing to his car. "Make sure there are no further misunderstandings tonight." Vanessa didn't argue. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the encounter was beginning to ebb, leaving her aware of her sodden clothes and the lateness of the hour. She slid back behind the wheel of her car, closing the door on the storm, and took a moment to collect herself. The drive to her home took less than 3 minutes. Wilson pulled into his driveway across the street, then jogged through the rain to meet her as she emerged from her vehicle. "You should come in and dry off," Vanessa offered, retrieving her briefcase from the passenger seat. Wilson nodded, following her up the walkway to her elegant colonial-style home. Once inside, Vanessa disappeared briefly, returning with 2 plush towels. She handed one to Wilson and used the other to pat dry her face and hair. "I'll make some tea," she said, moving toward the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime managing crises. "Or would you prefer something stronger?" "Tea is fine," Wilson replied, removing his wet overcoat and hanging it on a hook by the door. "Though I wouldn't turn down a bourbon if you're offering." A faint smile crossed Vanessa's face. "I think that can be arranged." She returned minutes later, having changed into dry clothes, a simple black turtleneck and slacks that maintained her commanding presence even without the uniform. She carried 2 tumblers, each containing 2 fingers of amber liquid. "Blanton's," she said, handing one to Wilson. "A gift from the Secretary of the Army after the Ramstein logistics operation." Wilson accepted the glass, taking an appreciative sip. "Good taste, that secretary." He settled into an armchair in her living room, watching as Vanessa took the seat opposite him. "Vanessa, what happened tonight was unacceptable." "I'm aware," she replied, her calm demeanor masking the complexity of emotions beneath. "But it's not unprecedented. Not for me, and certainly not for countless others who don't have congressional neighbors to intervene." "That's precisely why we can't let this slide," Wilson insisted. "Your position, your rank, should have been irrelevant," Vanessa interjected firmly. "I shouldn't need stars on my shoulders to be treated with basic dignity by law enforcement." Wilson nodded, conceding the point. "You're right, of course. But we both know that's not the world we live in. Not yet." He leaned forward. "Those officers need to be held accountable, not just for your sake, but for everyone who doesn't have your resources or connections." Vanessa sipped her bourbon, considering his words. Throughout her military career, she had navigated racial and gender barriers with strategic precision, choosing her battles carefully and always with an eye toward the greater mission. Tonight's incident was both personal and emblematic of a broader issue she couldn't ignore. "I'll make some calls in the morning," she said finally. "After I speak with the Chief of Staff. I have a briefing at 800 that can't be rescheduled." "The military machine never stops, does it?" Wilson remarked. "Not for rain, nor sleet, nor overzealous police officers," Vanessa confirmed with a wry smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, 2 public servants accustomed to the weight of responsibility, sipping bourbon in the quiet aftermath of an unnecessary storm. "Those officers had no idea what they were stepping into," Wilson said eventually. 3-star general, Pentagon official, Bronze Star recipient, West Point graduate, not to mention your role in the Mosul evacuation. "You've been reading my file, Congressman," Vanessa observed, raising an eyebrow. "Armed Services Committee," he reminded her. "It's my job to know who's running our military operations, though I suspect even if they had known all that, it might not have changed their approach." Vanessa set down her glass. "Perhaps not, but tomorrow is another day, and there will be consequences." Her tone carried the weight of command, a promise rather than a threat. "I have no doubt," Wilson replied. "What can I do to help?" "Be present at the meeting with Chief Martinez," she said after a moment's consideration. "Your perspective as a witness will be valuable." Wilson nodded his agreement. "Consider it done." As he prepared to leave, making his way back across the street to his own home, Vanessa stood in her doorway, watching the rain continue its relentless descent. The handcuffs were gone, but she could still feel their phantom pressure on her wrists, a tangible reminder of how quickly dignity could be stripped away, even from someone of her position. She closed the door, securing the deadbolt with a decisive click. Tomorrow would require all her strategic skills, not on the battlefield, but in the arena of justice and accountability. Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell had faced down warlords and coordinated complex military maneuvers under enemy fire. A couple of police officers who had made a grave miscalculation would soon discover they had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. The Pentagon's corridors hummed with their usual morning efficiency as Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell strode toward the Situation Room, her polished shoes clicking against the marble floors with metronomic precision. If her colleagues noticed the subtle tightness around her eyes or the slightly more rigid set of her shoulders, none commented. Military leadership required composure under all circumstances, and Vanessa had mastered that art decades ago. Colonel James Harris, her executive officer, fell into step beside her, tablet in hand, ready to brief her on overnight developments. Harris had served with Vanessa for 3 years and prided himself on anticipating her needs before she voiced them. "Good morning, General," he said, matching her brisk pace. Joint Chiefs moved the Sudan briefing to 0900, and General Whitmore requested 10 minutes on the secure line regarding the Asia-Pacific rotation schedules. Vanessa nodded, accepting the cup of coffee he handed her. "Thank you, Colonel. Any word from Arlington PD?" Harris hesitated, his expression betraying surprise. "Arlington Police Department? No, ma'am. Should there be?" She took a measured sip of coffee, buying a moment to decide how much to share. "There was an incident last night. I was wrongfully detained during a traffic stop near my home." "Ma'am?" Harris stopped walking, his professional demeanor briefly faltering. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Colonel," she assured him, continuing toward their destination. "But I'll need you to clear 30 minutes in my schedule this afternoon. I'll be meeting with Chief Martinez at Arlington PD headquarters." "Of course," Harris replied, quickly tapping notes into his tablet. "Would you like me to arrange transportation?" "That won't be necessary. Congressman Wilson will be accompanying me." She paused outside the Situation Room doors. "And I'll need legal to prepare the formal complaint documentation. Have Captain Reynolds contact me directly." Harris nodded, recognizing the steel in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. Anything else?" "That's all for now," Vanessa said, straightening her already impeccable uniform jacket. "Let's focus on the task at hand. We have soldiers depending on our decisions." The morning proceeded with its usual barrage of briefings, strategy sessions, and urgent communications from field operations. Vanessa moved through each with her characteristic thoroughness and insight, compartmentalizing the previous night's events. The military had taught her to separate personal concerns from professional responsibilities, a skill that had served her well throughout her career. It wasn't until her scheduled lunch break that she finally had a moment to address the situation. Alone in her office, she placed a call to Captain Eleanor Reynolds, the JAG officer she'd requested. "Captain, thank you for making time," Vanessa began once the preliminaries were dispensed with. "I need your expertise on filing a formal complaint against the Arlington Police Department." Captain Reynolds, a sharp-minded attorney with a reputation for meticulous preparation, listened attentively as Vanessa recounted the previous night's events without embellishment or emotional flourish. "This is serious, General," Reynolds said when Vanessa had finished. The officer's actions constitute clear violations of department policy, not to mention potential civil rights infractions. You have grounds for significant legal action if you choose to pursue it. I'm not interested in a lawsuit, Captain, Vanessa clarified. What I want is accountability and systemic change. I need to know what documentation to bring to my meeting with Chief Martinez this afternoon. Reynolds nodded, her expression thoughtful. In that case, I'd recommend focusing on departmental policy violations. I'll prepare a detailed brief outlining the specific infractions, with citations to Arlington PD's own protocols and relevant case law. Good. Have it ready by 1400 hours. Yes, ma'am. If I may ask, what outcome are you seeking from this meeting? Vanessa considered the question carefully. Justice that extends beyond my personal situation. If this happened to me, a 3-star general, in an affluent neighborhood with a congressional witness, imagine what's happening to those without such advantages. Understood, Reynolds replied. I'll incorporate broader policy recommendations into the brief. By the time Vanessa left the Pentagon that afternoon, news of the incident had begun to circulate through certain channels. The Secretary of the Army had called personally to express his concern, and 2 members of the Joint Chiefs had sent discreet messages of support. The military closed ranks around its own, especially when one of their highest-ranking officers had been disrespected. Congressman Wilson was waiting beside his government vehicle when she emerged from the building. "Ready for round 2?" he asked, his tone light though his eyes remained serious. "Always," Vanessa replied, sliding into the passenger seat. She carried a leather portfolio containing Captain Reynolds' meticulously prepared brief, along with documentation of her military service and security clearance. Not that either should have been necessary to avoid being handcuffed in the rain. Arlington Police Department headquarters presented a modern facade of glass and steel, designed to project transparency and professionalism. Vanessa noted the irony as they were escorted to Chief Martinez's office without delay. Chief Eduardo Martinez rose from behind his desk as they entered, his expression grave. At 53, Martinez had built his reputation on community policing and departmental reform, making last night's incident particularly embarrassing for his administration. "General Mitchell, Congressman Wilson," he greeted them, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. I want to personally apologize for what occurred last night." "I appreciate that, Chief," Vanessa replied, her tone professional but cool as they took their seats. "But I'm here for more than apologies." "Of course," Martinez acknowledged, glancing at a folder on his desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary report and spoken with both officers involved. Their actions were completely unacceptable and do not reflect the standards of this department." "Yet they occurred under your watch," Wilson pointed out, "which suggests either a training deficiency or a cultural issue within your ranks." Martinez didn't bristle at the accusation. Instead, he nodded slowly. "You're not wrong, Congressman. While I could claim these were the actions of 2 individuals who failed to follow protocol, the responsibility ultimately rests with leadership, with me." Vanessa studied the chief, finding his candor unexpected but refreshing. "What actions have you taken so far?" "Both officers have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation," Martinez reported. "And I've ordered an immediate review of our stop procedures and verification protocols." "That's a start," Vanessa acknowledged, opening her portfolio and extracting Captain Reynolds's brief. "But I've prepared some additional recommendations I believe are necessary." For the next 45 minutes, they engaged in a detailed discussion of policy reforms, training improvements, and accountability measures. Martinez, to his credit, listened attentively, occasionally taking notes or asking clarifying questions. "These are substantial changes, General," he said finally, reviewing the document she had provided. "Some will require approval from the Police Commission and City Council." "Then I suggest you begin that process immediately," Vanessa replied, "because Congressman Wilson and I will be following up regularly." Martinez nodded, understanding the implied leverage. A three-star general and the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee could create significant pressure if they chose to do so. "What about Officers Connolly and Dawson?" Wilson asked directly. "Administrative leave seems insufficient given the circumstances." Martinez exhaled slowly. "The investigation will determine the appropriate disciplinary action, but I can tell you they'll both face serious consequences. Officer Connolly was still in his probationary period, which gives us more latitude regarding his continued employment." "And Dawson?" Vanessa pressed. "He has 8 years on the force," Martinez admitted. "The union will become involved if we move toward termination. But at minimum, he'll face suspension without pay and mandatory retraining if he remains with the department." "That's not good enough," Wilson began. But Vanessa raised a hand, silencing his objection. "What matters most to me, Chief Martinez, is ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else," she said firmly. "I have the resources and position to address this incident. Many others do not." Martinez met her gaze directly. "I understand, General, and I give you my word that we will implement these reforms, not just because of who you are, but because they're the right thing to do." As they prepared to leave, Martinez asked an unexpected question. "General Mitchell, would you be willing to address our officers as part of our revised training program? Your perspective would be invaluable." Vanessa paused at the doorway, considering the request. It wasn't what she had expected, but perhaps it represented an opportunity for the kind of systemic change she sought. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "provided I see concrete evidence that these reforms are being implemented." Outside, as they walked toward the congressman's vehicle, Wilson glanced at her with newfound respect. "You know, Vanessa, you'd make one hell of a politician when you decide to hang up the uniform." She smiled faintly, her mind already turning to the next steps in her strategy. "I'll take that as both a compliment and a warning, Congressman." What neither of them realized as they drove away was that across town, a local news station had just received an anonymous tip about a three-star general being handcuffed in the rain by Arlington police officers. By morning, what had begun as a personal indignity would become a national conversation. General Vanessa Mitchell's 5:30 a.m. alarm had barely sounded when her secure phone began vibrating. The caller ID displayed SecDef, Secretary of Defense. Vanessa sat up immediately, years of military readiness overriding her desire for the additional 7 minutes of sleep she typically allowed herself. "General Mitchell," she answered, her voice clear despite having been asleep moments before. "Vanessa," Secretary Collins began, foregoing formalities. "Have you seen the news this morning?" "No, sir. I just woke up." She was already moving toward her closet, phone pressed to her ear, mentally cataloging potential crises that would warrant a pre-dawn call from her civilian superior. "Your encounter with Arlington PD is trending nationally. Someone leaked dashcam footage to the media." Vanessa paused, her hand halfway to the light switch. "I see. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they're all running it. There's helicopter footage of you and Congressman Wilson entering the police station yesterday. The Pentagon Public Affairs Office is being flooded with media requests." She switched on the television in her bedroom, keeping the volume low as she cycled to a news channel. Sure enough, there she was, standing in the rain, handcuffed beside her sedan while Congressman Wilson confronted the officers. The footage was grainy but unmistakable, her military bearing evident even in those humiliating circumstances. "I'll come in early," she said, already calculating the ripple effects. "Have Public Affairs direct all inquiries to my office. I'll prepare a statement." "The President has been briefed," Collins added. "He's concerned, both personally and about the optics. A three-star general being handcuffed on American soil doesn't exactly project military respect." "Understood, sir. I'll handle it." After ending the call, Vanessa stood motionless for a moment, watching as the morning news anchors dissected the footage, their expressions appropriately grave as they discussed troubling questions and patterns of behavior. Her personal humiliation was becoming a national talking point, a symbolic narrative in the ongoing conversation about policing in America. She showered and dressed with military efficiency, opting for her Class A uniform rather than her usual daily wear. Today would require the full weight of her rank to be visible. As she pinned her 3 stars to her shoulders, she reflected on how those same stars had failed to protect her that rainy night. By the time she reached the Pentagon, the story had evolved. Someone had leaked her military service record, the abbreviated public version, to the press. Now anchors were juxtaposing images of her in handcuffs with photographs of her receiving the Bronze Star, commanding troops in combat zones, and standing beside the president during strategic briefings. Colonel Harris met her at the security checkpoint, his normally unflappable demeanor showing cracks of concern. "General, we've established a crisis response team in Conference Room B. Public Affairs has drafted a preliminary statement, and legal is standing by." "Thank you, Colonel." She handed him her briefcase. "But first, I need 10 minutes in my office. Alone." Harris nodded, recognizing her need for a moment of privacy before facing the maelstrom. "Yes, ma'am. I've cleared your morning schedule except for the Joint Chiefs briefing at 1100. That couldn't be moved." Vanessa closed her office door behind her, taking a deep breath as she surveyed the familiar space. The walls were adorned with photographs documenting her distinguished career: West Point graduation, combat deployments, command ceremonies, meetings with world leaders. 27 years of service, of sacrifice, of breaking barriers and exceeding expectations. And now, for many Americans, her first introduction would be as the black female general handcuffed in the rain. Her private line rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Congressman Wilson. "Quite a morning," he said without preamble. "My office has received calls from 37 media outlets so far." "Similar situation here," Vanessa replied. "Any idea who leaked the footage?" "Not yet, but I have my suspicions. Police unions don't appreciate scrutiny of their officers, even when it's warranted. This could be an attempt to control the narrative by taking it public." "If so, it's backfired spectacularly," Vanessa noted, glancing at the muted television in her office where the story continued to unfold. A new Chiron announced, "Arlington Police Chief to hold press conference at 10 a.m. "Martinez is going public," Wilson observed. "That's either very good or very bad." "We'll find out soon enough," Vanessa said. "I need to prepare my own statement. The Secretary of Defense called this morning." "The White House called me," Wilson countered. "This has escalated beyond a local police matter, Vanessa. Are you prepared for that?" She considered his question carefully. Throughout her career, she had navigated complex, high-stakes situations with calm deliberation. But those had been military matters, strategic operations, troop deployments, national security decisions. This was deeply personal, yet simultaneously symbolic in ways that extended far beyond her individual experience. "I didn't choose this spotlight, Congressman," she finally said. "But now that it's here, I intend to use it constructively." Across town, Officers James Connolly and Ryan Dawson were experiencing the situation very differently. Connolly sat in his apartment, blinds drawn against the news van parked outside, watching his career implode in real time on his television screen. His phone buzzed with a text from Dawson. "Don't talk to anyone. Union lawyer will call you." Too late, Connolly thought. He'd already received 15 calls from unknown numbers, presumably journalists seeking comment. His social media accounts had been discovered, with old posts dissected for evidence of bias or misconduct. A college photo of him at a Halloween party had already been flagged as potentially problematic. At 31 months on the force, he was still on probation. No union protection, no guaranteed due process. He was, as his academy instructor had once bluntly put it, expendable if you screw up badly enough. Handcuffing a decorated 3-star general during a routine traffic stop based on flimsy pretexts probably qualified as screwing up badly enough. His phone rang again, his mother this time. He let it go to voicemail. What could he possibly say to her? That he had followed his partner's lead? That the system verification had been slow? That in the dark and rain, he hadn't recognized the significance of the Pentagon credentials or the military bearing of the woman he was detaining? All true, none sufficient. At 10 a.m. sharp, Chief Martinez stepped behind a podium crowded with microphones, his expression somber as cameras flashed. The department's public information officer had urged him to stick to generalities, to cite the ongoing investigation, to avoid definitive statements that might create liability. Martinez had other ideas. "Good morning," he began, looking directly into the cameras. 2 nights ago, members of the Arlington Police Department wrongfully detained Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell during a traffic stop near her home. This incident represents a fundamental failure of our department's procedures, training, and culture. For that, I take full responsibility and offer my unequivocal apology to General Mitchell. In the Pentagon conference room, Vanessa watched the press conference alongside her staff, noting the surprised expressions of her public affairs officers as Martinez continued. Effective immediately, Officers Connolly and Dawson have been suspended without pay pending the completion of our internal investigation. Additionally, I am implementing a comprehensive review of our department's stop procedures, verification protocols, and bias training programs. Martinez paused, seeming to gather himself before continuing. This incident has revealed unacceptable shortcomings in our department's operations, but it has also provided an opportunity for meaningful reform. To that end, I have accepted all recommendations presented by General Mitchell during our meeting yesterday, and will be working with the City Council to implement them fully. "He's falling on his sword," murmured Colonel Harris, standing beside Vanessa. "He's doing the right thing," Vanessa corrected. "There's a difference." The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, as Martinez fielded increasingly pointed questions from journalists. He neither deflected nor minimized, addressing each query with straightforward candor, unusual for a public official in crisis. When asked directly about the officers' futures with the department, Martinez was unequivocal. Officer Connolly's probationary status will be terminated. Officer Dawson's case will proceed through the established disciplinary process, but I want to be clear. The behavior displayed that night is incompatible with the standards I expect from Arlington police officers. By noon, the story had evolved yet again. 3 additional Arlington residents had come forward with similar accounts of questionable stops and detentions by the same officers. All 3 were people of color. None had the resources or platform of a lieutenant general. Vanessa's phone lit up with a text from Captain Reynolds. "You should see this," accompanied by a link to a social media video. A young black woman, identified as Tasha Johnson, was describing being pulled over by Officers Dawson and Connolly 3 weeks earlier. "They made me stand in the rain too," Johnson said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "No congressman came to help me. Nobody leaked my dashcam video. But seeing General Mitchell go through the same thing, it made me realize I wasn't crazy for feeling targeted." Vanessa set down her phone, her resolution crystallizing. This had never been just about her experience. It had always been about the pattern, the system, the countless others who faced similar treatment without her advantages or protections. At precisely 2 p.m., Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell stepped behind a Pentagon podium to deliver her own statement to the assembled press. The 3 stars on each shoulder caught the light as she squared her stance, prepared to transform a personal indignity into a catalyst for change. The Pentagon briefing room fell silent as Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell approached the podium. Cameras flashed, capturing the determined set of her jaw, the precise line of her uniform, and the unmistakable authority of her 3 stars. Behind her stood Colonel Harris and Captain Reynolds, a visual reminder of the institutional weight she carried. For a moment, she surveyed the packed room, making brief eye contact with key reporters. She had faced hostile terrain in combat zones, navigated complex diplomatic negotiations in fragile states, and commanded thousands of troops in high-pressure situations. This was simply another battlefield, albeit one she hadn't chosen. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and measured. "2 nights ago, I was wrongfully detained by Arlington Police Department officers while returning home from work at the Pentagon. The dashcam footage of this incident has now been widely circulated, and I appreciate the concern many have expressed for my well-being and dignity." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "I want to be clear. This press conference is not about me. It is about what my experience represents within a broader context of law enforcement interactions across our nation. It is about accountability, professional standards, and the fundamental respect every citizen deserves, regardless of their rank, title, or position." In the second row, a veteran Pentagon correspondent who had covered Mitchell's career for years nodded slightly. He recognized the strategic pivot she was executing, transforming a personal affront into a principled stand. "I have served this country for 27 years, Mitchell continued. "During that time, I've been responsible for the lives of American soldiers in combat zones. I've made decisions with national security implications. I've upheld the oath I took to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic." She leaned slightly forward, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. "That same Constitution guarantees every American certain rights and protections. When those protections fail for someone with my privileges and position, we must ask serious questions about how they're failing others without such advantages." The room remained hushed as journalists furiously took notes. This was not the defensive posture of a wronged individual seeking personal vindication. This was a strategic commander identifying systemic vulnerabilities and proposing corrective action. "I've spoken directly with Chief Martinez of the Arlington Police Department. I acknowledge and appreciate his forthright response and commitment to meaningful reform. The measures he has outlined, from procedural changes to enhanced training and accountability systems, represent important steps toward addressing the issues that led to my detention." She straightened, her posture impeccable. "I have also been contacted by several citizens who experienced similar treatment from the same officers. Their stories will not make national headlines. Their military records will not be publicized to validate their right to fair treatment, but their experiences matter equally to mine." In a small apartment across town, Tasha Johnson watched the press conference with tears streaming down her face. For weeks, she had questioned whether she had somehow invited the humiliating treatment she'd received, whether she had said something wrong, appeared suspicious, or failed to comply properly. Seeing a 3-star general articulate the same confusion and indignity she had felt was validating in ways she couldn't fully express. "Going forward," Mitchell continued, "I will be working with the Department of Defense, the Arlington Police Department, and congressional leadership to develop enhanced protocols for law enforcement interactions with military personnel, not to create special privileges, but to ensure that identification procedures are properly respected." She paused, then added, "Additionally, I am establishing a dedicated phone line for service members who experience similar situations to provide guidance and support. This resource will be available to military personnel of all ranks." At the back of the room, a White House aide took careful notes. The president had been clear. This situation needed to be monitored closely. A decorated general being handcuffed had implications for military morale and civil-military relations, areas of particular concern to the commander-in-chief. "I will now take a few questions," Mitchell concluded, gesturing to a reporter in the front row. "General Mitchell, do you believe racial bias played a role in your detention?" Mitchell didn't flinch at the direct question. "I cannot and will not speculate on the officer's internal motivations. What I can say is that proper procedures were not followed, verification protocols were ignored, and the situation was unnecessarily escalated. Those are facts supported by evidence." Another reporter quickly followed up. "Would you support the termination of both officers involved?" "Personnel decisions within the Arlington Police Department are not mine to make," Mitchell replied diplomatically. "I support a thorough investigation and appropriate accountability based on departmental standards and protocols." A third journalist rose. "General, some police unions are suggesting that the release of this footage is creating an unfair public trial before due process. Your response?" Mitchell's expression remained unchanged, though those who knew her well might have detected a slight tightening around her eyes. "Transparency serves everyone's interests," she stated firmly. "The footage shows exactly what happened, without embellishment or interpretation. If viewing an officer's actual conduct raises concerns about professionalism, perhaps the issue lies with the conduct, not with its documentation." The questions continued for another 15 minutes, covering everything from department policy to implicit bias training to Mitchell's personal feelings during the detention. She fielded each with the same steady composure, neither minimizing the incident's significance nor allowing it to be sensationalized. As the press conference concluded, Mitchell's phone buzzed with a message from the Secretary of Defense. "Masterfully handled. POTUS watching. Wants to meet tomorrow." Meanwhile, across the Potomac, the Arlington Police Department was facing its own crisis. The phone lines were jammed with calls from concerned citizens, civil rights organizations, and media outlets. The department's social media accounts were flooded with comments, many sharing personal stories of questionable stops and detentions. In the chief's conference room, Martinez met with his leadership team, including representatives from internal affairs, training, and community relations. The preliminary review of Officer Dawson's record shows 7 civilian complaints in the past 2 years, reported Captain Gloria Ramirez from Internal Affairs. 3 involved allegations of excessive force during traffic stops. All were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. "And Connolly?" Martinez asked, though he suspected the answer. 2 complaints in his 31 months, both involving alleged discourtesy toward minority drivers. Neither progressed beyond initial review. Martinez rubbed his temples. "So we had warning signs that were ignored." "The system worked as designed, Chief," Ramirez replied carefully. "Without corroborating evidence, the system failed," Martinez cut her off. "If the designed system allows officers with patterns of concerning behavior to continue without intervention until they handcuff a Pentagon official, then the design itself is flawed." The room fell silent as the implications settled. This wasn't just about 2 officers anymore. It was about the entire accountability structure of the department. By evening, the story had evolved yet again. National civil rights leaders had issued statements, police reform advocates were citing the incident as evidence of systemic problems, and military forums were buzzing with discussions about civilian respect for the armed forces. At the Pentagon, Vanessa Mitchell worked late into the night, reviewing operational reports and deployment schedules. The military mission continued, regardless of personal circumstances. Colonel Harris found her at her desk just past 10 p.m. "General, your car is waiting," he reminded her gently. "And the White House confirmed your Aero 800 meeting with the President tomorrow." Mitchell nodded, gathering her briefcase. "Thank you, Colonel. Have we received the updated analysis on the Eastern deployment zones?" "Yes, ma'am. It's on your secure server for review." As they walked toward the exit, Harris ventured a personal observation. "If I may, General, your handling of this situation has been exemplary. The entire staff is proud to serve under your command." Mitchell offered a rare smile. "Thank you, James. But we're just getting started. Real change requires sustained effort and follow-through." Outside, her driver held the car door as she slid into the back seat. As they pulled away from the Pentagon, Mitchell gazed out at the illuminated monuments of Washington, D.C., physical representations of the democratic ideals she had sworn to defend. Tomorrow would bring a meeting with the president, more media inquiries, and the continuing challenge of balancing her operational responsibilities with her unexpected role as a catalyst for police reform. But tonight, Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection on the power of position, the burden of representation, and the long road to meaningful change. The White House gleamed in the early morning sunlight as Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell's government vehicle passed through the security checkpoint. Despite having visited numerous times for briefings and strategy sessions, she still felt a quiet reverence when approaching the symbolic center of American democracy. Today, however, her visit carried different weight. Secret Service agents greeted her with professional courtesy, escorting her through the West Wing to a small waiting area outside the Oval Office. Mitchell noted the subtle shift in how staff regarded her, a mix of respect and curiosity that hadn't been present during her previous security briefings. "General Mitchell," the President's Chief of Staff emerged with an extended hand. "Thank you for coming. The President is just finishing a call with the German Chancellor and will be with you shortly." Mitchell nodded, remaining standing. "Of course. Your press conference yesterday was impressive," the Chief of Staff continued, studying her with analytical eyes. "Measured, strategic, forward-looking. The President was particularly struck by how you elevated the conversation beyond your personal experience." "It seemed the appropriate approach," Mitchell replied simply. Before the conversation could continue, the Oval Office door opened, and the President of the United States appeared, extending his hand with a warm smile. "General Mitchell, please come in." The Oval Office always felt smaller in person than it appeared on television, more intimate, more human-scaled than its outsized place in the national imagination would suggest. The President gestured toward the sitting area rather than the more formal desk arrangement, indicating this would be a substantive conversation rather than a photo opportunity. "I want to start by saying how disturbed I was by what happened to you," the President began once they were seated. "As your Commander-in-Chief and as an American citizen, I found it profoundly troubling." "Thank you, Mr. President," Mitchell responded. "Though, as I've stated publicly, my concern extends beyond my personal situation to the systemic issues it represents." The President nodded approvingly. "That approach is precisely why I wanted to meet with you directly. This incident has created a unique opportunity to address long-standing problems in law enforcement practices, and your handling of it has opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed." For the next 30 minutes, they engaged in a candid discussion about police reform, civil-military relations, and the complex intersection of race, authority, and public safety in America. The President listened attentively as Mitchell outlined the protocols she had proposed to the Arlington Police Department, occasionally taking notes or asking clarifying questions. "What you're suggesting could serve as a national model," he observed. "Not just for interactions with military personnel, but for verification procedures and de-escalation training more broadly." "That would be my hope, sir." The President leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to establish a federal task force to develop these standards, with representation from the Department of Defense, Justice Department, and law enforcement organizations. Would you be willing to serve as the DoD representative?" Mitchell considered the request carefully. Throughout her career, she had avoided being drawn into politically charged issues, focusing instead on her military responsibilities. Yet this opportunity aligned perfectly with the strategic objectives she had already set for herself in response to the incident. "I would be honored, Mr. President, though I would need to balance those duties with my current operational responsibilities." "Of course," the President agreed. Secretary Collins has already assured me that arrangements can be made to accommodate both roles. Your perspective is invaluable precisely because you aren't a professional police reformer or political appointee. You bring the credibility of your rank and service record, along with first-hand experience of the problem we're trying to solve. As the meeting concluded, the President walked Mitchell to the door, stopping briefly at his desk. "One more thing, General. I'll be addressing the nation tonight about infrastructure legislation, but I plan to reference your situation and announce the task force. I wanted you to hear it from me directly." "I appreciate that, sir." "Your dignity throughout this ordeal has been remarkable," the President added. "It's reminded the country what leadership should look like." Back in her vehicle, Mitchell reviewed her secure messages while being driven to the Pentagon. Among them was an update from Congressman Wilson. The House Judiciary Committee had announced oversight hearings on police detention practices, with a specific focus on the Arlington incident. What had begun as a routine traffic stop was now driving national policy discussions at the highest levels of government. Mitchell wasn't naive about the politics involved. The President and members of Congress recognized a compelling narrative when they saw one. But she remained focused on ensuring that substantive changes would emerge from the heightened attention. At the Pentagon, Colonel Harris awaited with the day's operational briefings and an update on the military support line they had established. "We've received 37 calls since yesterday, General. Captain Reynolds has assigned JAG officers to follow up on each case." "Any patterns emerging?" "Yes, ma'am. Predominantly junior enlisted personnel, primarily minorities. Most incidents occurring near bases in southern states. We're compiling detailed analytics." Mitchell nodded, already considering how this data might inform the task force's work. "Good. I want comprehensive statistics before our first official meeting. This can't be anecdotal if we want lasting policy changes." Across town, Ryan Dawson sat across from his union representative and a department attorney in a sterile conference room at Arlington PD headquarters. The preliminary disciplinary hearing had been scheduled with unprecedented speed, a fact the union rep had already protested 3 times. "Officer Dawson, you've reviewed the evidence and charges against you," the department attorney stated. "The chief is prepared to offer terms that would allow you to resign rather than face termination proceedings." Dawson's jaw tightened. 8 years on the force, reduced to negotiating the least damaging exit. "This is a railroad job," the union representative objected. "My client followed established department procedures for suspicious vehicles in high-value neighborhoods." "Your client handcuffed a 3-star general based on a fabricated report of suspicious activity," the attorney countered. "The dashcam audio clearly shows he claimed to have received a call that dispatch has no record of. He then escalated a routine stop to a detention without reasonable suspicion, ignored valid military identification, and created a public relations disaster that has reached the White House." Dawson stared at the table, remembering the countless similar stops he had conducted over the years. Only this time he had chosen the wrong target. Someone with power, someone who couldn't be dismissed or intimidated, someone whose word would be believed over his. "What are the terms?" he finally asked, ignoring his representative's look of disapproval. "Resignation effective immediately. The department doesn't contest your application for unemployment. No negative reference for future non-law enforcement employment. In exchange, you waive all rights to appeal or litigation. And if I refuse?" The attorney's expression remained impassive. "Then we proceed to a full disciplinary hearing, where the chief will recommend termination for cause, with a formal finding of misconduct that will follow you to any future law enforcement position." Hours later, the union representative stood before a bank of microphones outside police headquarters, reading a prepared statement. "Officer Ryan Dawson has submitted his resignation to pursue other opportunities. He maintains that his actions were consistent with his training and department protocols, and he wishes his colleagues well as they continue to serve the Arlington community." The assembled journalists immediately shouted follow-up questions, but the representative quickly departed, leaving the media to frame the resignation as what it clearly was: a forced exit in response to public pressure and indefensible conduct. James Connolly's situation had been resolved even more swiftly. As a probationary officer, he had been summarily dismissed without the procedural protections afforded to his senior partner. His law enforcement career had ended less than 3 years after it began, his name now permanently linked to a national controversy about police misconduct. That evening, millions of Americans watched as the president addressed the nation from the Oval Office. After discussing infrastructure investments and economic initiatives, he shifted to a topic that had dominated news cycles for the past 48 hours. Many of you have seen the troubling footage of Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell being wrongfully detained by local police officers, he said, his expression grave. General Mitchell is one of our nation's most distinguished military leaders, responsible for operations that protect American security interests worldwide. The treatment she received was unacceptable and inconsistent with the respect due to any citizen, let alone a senior military officer serving our country. The camera remained steady on his face as he continued. I've spoken directly with General Mitchell, and I'm impressed by her desire to transform this unfortunate incident into meaningful reform. Today, I am establishing a presidential task force on law enforcement standards and practices, which will develop national guidelines for verification procedures, de-escalation training, and accountability measures. In her Pentagon office, Vanessa Mitchell watched the address with Colonel Harris and Captain Reynolds, noting the strategic framing of the initiative and the careful balance between supporting law enforcement while demanding higher standards. He's using this well, Harris observed. As he should, Mitchell replied. The focus needs to remain on systemic solutions, not individual officers or a single incident. Reynolds nodded in agreement. The task force gives this staying power beyond the news cycle. Smart approach. As the president concluded his remarks, Mitchell's secure line rang. It was Secretary of Defense Collins. "Congratulations, General," he said when she answered. "You've just been handed significant influence over national police reform, all while maintaining your military duties. Not a small accomplishment." "The real accomplishment will be implementing effective changes, sir." "Indeed," Collins agreed. "And on that note, I've just received word that the police union has requested a meeting with you. Apparently, they're concerned about being excluded from the reform process." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Just yesterday, their spokesperson was questioning my account of the incident." "Politics makes for strange bedfellows," Collins observed dryly, "especially when the president is involved. How do you want to handle it?" Mitchell considered her options, weighing the strategic advantages of inclusion against the potential for obstruction. "Set up the meeting," she decided. "This needs to be collaborative to be effective, but make it clear they're joining a reform effort, not derailing one." As she ended the call, Mitchell glanced again at the television, where analysts were now dissecting the president's announcement and its implications. What had begun with handcuffs in the rain was evolving into something with potential for lasting impact. Whether that potential would be realized remained to be seen. But Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell was accustomed to seeing complicated missions through to completion. This one would be no different. The Arlington Police Union headquarters occupied a modest 2-story building just outside the county government complex. As Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell's car pulled into the parking lot, she noted the small gathering of uniformed officers near the entrance, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. A few news vans were stationed across the street, camera crews ready to capture her arrival for the evening broadcasts. "Quite the welcoming committee," observed Colonel Harris, who had accompanied her to the meeting. "Expected," Mitchell replied calmly. "Change is rarely embraced by those who benefit from the status quo." Inside, the conference room had been prepared with careful attention to optics. The union representatives had arranged the seating to place Mitchell and Harris on one side of a long table, with 6 union officials opposite them, a visual statement about the balance of power they hoped to establish. Mitchell immediately disrupted this arrangement, moving to the head of the table and gesturing for her aide to set up her materials. "Gentlemen, shall we begin?" she said, effectively reclaiming control of the physical space before a single word had been exchanged. Frank Mercer, the union president and a 20-year veteran of the force, adjusted to the new dynamic with visible irritation. "General Mitchell, we appreciate you taking this meeting. We have serious concerns about the direction and composition of the President's task force." "I understand," Mitchell replied. "That's why I'm here, to ensure all stakeholders have input into this process. Effective reform requires broad participation." She opened her portfolio, extracting a single-page document that she slid across the table to Mercer. "These are the core principles that will guide the task force's work. I'd like to hear your thoughts." Mercer scanned the page, his brow furrowing. "Civilian oversight? Mandatory body cameras with public access to footage? Enhanced penalties for verification failures? General, with all due respect, these read like a wish list from anti-police activists." Mitchell's expression remained impassive. "Those principles reflect best practices already implemented in departments across the country, Mr. Mercer. Departments that have seen improvements in both community relations and officer safety as a result." Another union representative, Lieutenant Sandra Ortiz, leaned forward. "The problem we have, General, is that this entire initiative stems from a single incident that's been blown out of proportion by the media. 2 officers made a mistake in a high-stress situation. Now we're talking about national reform? A single incident that revealed systemic weaknesses," Mitchell corrected. "And those officers' mistake involved handcuffing a senior military official without cause and ignoring proper identification protocols. If that can happen to someone in my position, what protections exist for ordinary citizens?" Mercer's tone sharpened. "We're concerned that this task force is being established without adequate representation from law enforcement professionals who understand the realities of the job." "The task force will include experienced law enforcement officials," Mitchell assured him. "But it will also include civil rights experts, legal scholars, and community representatives. Comprehensive reform requires diverse perspectives." For the next hour, the discussion continued in this vein. The union representatives pushing for minimal changes and greater police protections, Mitchell calmly redirecting toward accountability and procedural improvements. Throughout, she maintained the measured demeanor that had characterized her public responses to the incident, neither raising her voice nor conceding essential points. "Let me be clear," she said as the meeting neared its conclusion. "This process is moving forward with or without your active participation, but I genuinely believe it will produce better results with your expertise included." Mercer exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. "We'll need certain assurances, specifically that any proposed reforms will be reviewed for operational feasibility by active duty officers before implementation." "Reasonable," Mitchell acknowledged. "I'll ensure that provision is included in the task force charter, provided you designate representatives with open minds and constructive approaches." As they gathered their materials to leave, Lieutenant Ortiz approached Mitchell privately. "General, off the record, I don't agree with how those officers handled your stop. Most of us don't. But this union has to protect its members, even when they make serious mistakes." Mitchell studied the woman thoughtfully. "I understand institutional loyalty, Lieutenant. The military operates on similar principles. But there comes a point when protecting individuals who violate standards damages the institution itself." "That's a perspective worth considering," Ortiz admitted. "For what it's worth, I'd be interested in serving as one of the union's representatives to the task force." Outside, the news crews captured footage of Mitchell emerging from the building, her posture straight, her expression resolute. The evening news would report a productive initial dialogue between the general and police representatives, though sources close to the discussions described significant areas of disagreement remaining. Back at the Pentagon, Mitchell found a small stack of handwritten letters on her desk. Colonel Harris had been screening the influx of correspondence since the incident became public, but these particular messages had been flagged for her personal attention. From fellow service members who've experienced similar situations, Harris explained. Nothing requiring immediate response, but I thought you might want to see them. Mitchell nodded, setting them aside for later review. What's our status on the deployment schedules for the Pacific rotation? Final approvals pending your signature, ma'am. And General Whitmore requested a video conference regarding the joint exercises scheduled for next month. Schedule it for tomorrow morning, Mitchell directed, returning seamlessly to her primary military duties. And inform the task force staff that I'll need the preliminary framework document by 1800 hours if we're going to meet the President's timeline. Later that evening, in the quiet of her home, Mitchell finally opened the letters Harris had given her. Each told a similar story. Military personnel, primarily minorities, subjected to questionable stops, excessive scrutiny, or outright harassment by civilian police. Some incidents had occurred near military installations, others in the service members' home communities. All described the confusion, humiliation, and anger of having their military credentials dismissed or ignored. A captain stationed at Fort Bragg wrote about being forced to lie face down on hot pavement while his military ID was run through a verification system, despite being in uniform. A Navy lieutenant described being held at gunpoint during a traffic stop when she reached for her ID as instructed. A young Marine corporal detailed being handcuffed and detained for over 2 hours after police refused to believe his explanation for being in an upscale neighborhood. He was visiting his commanding officer's home for a unit gathering. Mitchell read each account carefully, noting patterns and specific procedural failures that could inform the task force's work. The stories reinforced what she already knew. Her experience had not been an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern affecting military personnel across ranks and services. She was making notes on the final letter when her secure phone rang. The caller ID displayed SecDef, unusual for this hour, unless there was an operational crisis. General Mitchell, she answered crisply. Vanessa, sorry to call so late, Secretary Collins began. I've just come from a meeting with the President. He's planning to attend the first public session of the task force next week. Mitchell processed this information quickly. Presidential attendance would elevate the task force's profile significantly, while also introducing complex political and security considerations. I see. That certainly underscores the administration's commitment to this initiative. It does, Collins agreed. But it also raises the stakes. The President is investing personal political capital in this effort, which means expectations for concrete outcomes are exceptionally high. Understood, sir. We'll be prepared. After ending the call, Mitchell stood at her living room window, gazing out at the quiet suburban street where she had been handcuffed less than a week earlier. The incident itself had lasted perhaps 15 minutes of her life, yet its reverberations were now shaping national policy discussions, law enforcement practices, and potentially the experiences of countless service members and civilians. The next morning, she arrived at the Pentagon earlier than usual, reviewing operational reports before turning her attention to task force matters. Captain Reynolds had prepared an analysis of the military support line data, confirming the patterns Mitchell had observed in the personal letters. We've identified 143 incidents in the past 3 years that follow similar patterns to your experience, General, Reynolds reported, disproportionately affecting minority service members, but crossing all ranks and branches. Compile case studies of the 10 most egregious examples, Mitchell directed. Anonymize the details, but preserve the essential facts. I want these ready for the first task force session. Throughout the day, Mitchell balanced her regular Pentagon responsibilities with preparations for the task force's inaugural meeting. Joint Chiefs briefings, deployment authorizations, and strategic assessments flowed seamlessly into discussions of police reform, verification protocols, and accountability mechanisms. By evening, news of the president's planned attendance at the task force meeting had leaked to the press, elevating public interest in the initiative. Mitchell's staff fielded dozens of media inquiries, all met with the same response. The task force is focused on developing substantive reforms rather than publicity. General Mitchell will provide updates when concrete progress has been achieved. As Mitchell prepared to leave for the day, Congressman Wilson called with an update from Capitol Hill. "The Judiciary Committee hearings are set for next Thursday," he informed her. "They're requesting your testimony." Mitchell had anticipated this development. Will the format be conducive to substantive discussion, or is this primarily political theater? Wilson chuckled. "A bit of both, I'm afraid. But it's an important platform, Vanessa. Your testimony could help shape the legislative component of these reforms." "Then I'll be there," she decided. "Though I'll need to coordinate with the White House to ensure my remarks align with the task force's preliminary findings." "Of course," Wilson agreed. "By the way, you've become something of a folk hero among my colleagues with military backgrounds. 3 representatives who served have shared stories of similar experiences with local police. This is resonating far beyond your individual case." After the call, Mitchell sat at her desk for a long moment, contemplating the rapidly expanding scope of what had begun as a personal indignity. She had not sought this platform or this cause, yet she recognized the rare opportunity it presented, a chance to drive meaningful reform from a position of unassailable credibility. Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell had built her career on strategic thinking, disciplined execution, and unwavering focus on mission objectives. Now those same skills were being applied to a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemies were bias, poor training, and institutional resistance to change, and the stakes involved the fundamental relationship between those who served in uniform and those who enforced the law. The Justice Department's Great Hall had been transformed for the inaugural meeting of the Presidential Task Force on Law Enforcement Standards. The imposing space, with its soaring columns and ornate ceiling, typically hosted ceremonial functions rather than working sessions. Today, however, its grandeur served a strategic purpose, conveying the historical significance of the initiative being launched within its walls. Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell arrived an hour before the scheduled start, reviewing the seating arrangements and briefing materials with meticulous attention. The 20-person task force represented a carefully balanced cross-section of stakeholders: 4 law enforcement executives, including Chief Martinez, 3 civil rights attorneys, 2 retired judges, 3 academic experts on policing, 2 community advocates, 3 military representatives led by Mitchell herself, and 3 Justice Department officials. "The President will enter from the East Door," a White House advance team member informed her. "He'll make brief remarks, then turn the proceedings over to you before taking a seat as an observer for approximately 30 minutes. Mitchell nodded, making a mental note to adjust her opening comments accordingly. The President's participation, while valuable for elevating the initiative's profile, added a layer of political complexity she would need to navigate carefully. The task force members arrived gradually, creating small clusters of conversation around the room. Mitchell observed the dynamics with interest, noting which law enforcement representatives engaged with civil rights attorneys and which remained isolated among their peers. Lieutenant Ortiz, representing the Arlington Police Union, made a deliberate effort to introduce herself to several community advocates, a promising sign of openness to dialogue. At precisely 10 a.m., the President entered the room, triggering a ripple of attention as conversations ceased and everyone rose in respect. After delivering remarks that emphasized the historic opportunity to rebuild trust between those who enforce our laws and those they serve, he graciously ceded the floor to Mitchell. "Thank you, Mr. President," she began, standing straight behind the podium, her uniform immaculate and authoritative. "Distinguished members of the task force, we gather today with a clear mission: to develop national standards that ensure law enforcement interactions are conducted with professionalism, respect, and adherence to constitutional principles." She surveyed the diverse faces before her, establishing brief eye contact with key stakeholders. The incident that catalyzed this initiative was not unique. Since that night, hundreds of service members have come forward with similar experiences, revealing a pattern that transcends individual officers or departments. This suggests a systemic issue requiring systemic solutions. Mitchell activated a large screen behind her, displaying a series of anonymized case studies, the 10 examples Captain Reynolds had prepared from the military support line data. These incidents share common elements: misinterpreted behaviors, escalation before verification, disregard for military identification, and disproportionate impacts on minority service members. Our task is to develop protocols that address these patterns while supporting officers in their legitimate public safety mission. For the next 3 hours, the task force engaged in substantive discussion of verification standards, de-escalation training, and accountability mechanisms. Mitchell facilitated with the precise balance of authority and inclusivity she had honed through years of military leadership, ensuring all perspectives were heard while maintaining focus on concrete deliverables. The President observed for 45 minutes, 15 minutes longer than planned, before departing with a brief statement of confidence in the task force's work. His presence had achieved its purpose, establishing the initiative's importance while allowing the substantive work to proceed without political theater. By session's end, the task force had established 3 working groups focused on distinct aspects of reform: verification protocols, training standards, and accountability systems. Each would develop specific recommendations for the full task force's consideration, with an accelerated timeline reflecting the national attention on their work. As Mitchell gathered her materials, Chief Martinez approached. "Masterfully handled, General," he said with genuine admiration. "I've sat through countless task forces and commissions over the years. Most dissolve into ideology and grandstanding. You kept everyone focused on practical solutions. Military leadership training has its applications beyond the battlefield," Mitchell replied with a slight smile. "Though I suspect the real challenges lie ahead, when we move from principles to specific implementation requirements." Martinez nodded soberly. "The devil's always in the details, but you've established the right foundation. Accountability balanced with operational realities. That's the sweet spot for meaningful reform." The following morning's news coverage was largely positive, with outlets across the political spectrum acknowledging the task force's substantive approach. A few opinion pieces questioned whether the initiative would produce lasting change or simply generate recommendations that would gather dust on bureaucratic shelves, but even these acknowledged the unique momentum created by Mitchell's case. At the Pentagon, Mitchell transitioned seamlessly back to her military responsibilities, spending the day reviewing operational assessments and participating in a secure video conference with field commanders. The ability to compartmentalize, to give full attention to each distinct responsibility without letting one bleed into another, had been essential to her advancement through the ranks, and it served her equally well in her current dual role. By week's end, however, her focus shifted to yet another arena as she prepared for her testimony before the House Judiciary Committee. Captain Reynolds and a Pentagon legislative affairs specialist worked with her to refine her opening statement, anticipating likely questions from both supportive and skeptical representatives. "The political dynamics are complex, General," the legislative specialist advised during their final preparation session. "Some members will use your experience to advocate for sweeping reforms, while others may attempt to minimize it as an isolated incident. Your challenge will be to maintain a nonpartisan stance while advocating for substantive change. I'm well aware of the political currents, Mitchell replied, but my testimony will remain focused on facts, patterns, and solutions. The integrity of the uniform I wear demands nothing less. The hearing room was packed when Mitchell arrived on Thursday morning. The high-profile nature of her case, combined with her distinguished military record, had transformed what might have been a sparsely attended policy discussion into a media event. Camera crews lined the back wall, and the public gallery was filled with a mix of military personnel, police reform advocates, and curious citizens. Congressman Wilson, though not a member of the Judiciary Committee, had used his seniority to secure a seat at the dais. He offered Mitchell a subtle nod of encouragement as she was sworn in, her right hand raised with the same solemnity she had shown when taking her military oath decades earlier. The committee chairman, a veteran legislator known for his measured approach to criminal justice issues, began with a series of straightforward questions about the incident itself and Mitchell's subsequent interactions with Arlington police leadership. She responded with precision, neither dramatizing the experience nor minimizing its significance. As questioning passed to other committee members, the political dimensions became more apparent. A representative from a conservative district framed his questions around the difficult split-second decisions officers must make, while a progressive colleague emphasized the pattern of bias revealed by Mitchell's experience and subsequent service member reports. Throughout, Mitchell maintained her diplomatic balance, acknowledging the legitimate challenges of policing while insisting on professional standards and accountability. When a representative attempted to draw her into a broader debate about defunding police departments, she deftly redirected the conversation to specific protocols that could improve interactions without undermining public safety. The most powerful moment came near the session's end, when a freshman representative who had served as a Marine Corps officer before entering politics asked about the impact on military morale. General Mitchell, beyond your personal experience, what message does this incident and others like it send to the men and women serving under your command? How does it affect their view of the country they've sworn to defend? Mitchell paused, considering the question with appropriate gravity. Congressman, when service members experience disrespect or mistreatment from civilian authorities, it creates a profound disconnect. These individuals have volunteered to risk their lives protecting American values abroad, only to find those same values seemingly suspended for them at home. That disconnect doesn't just affect morale, it challenges the very foundation of their service commitment. She straightened in her chair, her voice carrying the weight of command. But I would add this: the response to my incident gives me hope. From the President's task force to this committee's attention, we're seeing a commitment to addressing these issues substantively. That response reassures service members that their experiences matter, that accountability is possible, and that the principles they defend are worth fighting for at home as well as abroad. As the hearing concluded, Mitchell's testimony was already being clipped for evening news broadcasts and social media distribution. Her balanced approach had largely defied partisan framing, focusing instead on practical reforms that most Americans, regardless of political affiliation, could recognize as reasonable and necessary. Outside the hearing room, a small group of military personnel in civilian clothes waited to speak with her. Most were junior officers and enlisted members who had experienced similar incidents but lacked the platform to address them. "Thank you, General," a young Army sergeant said, her eyes conveying more than her simple words. "Not just for what you're doing now, but for showing us how to turn an injustice into something constructive." Mitchell recognized in that moment that her response to being handcuffed in the rain had become something larger than police reform or verification protocols. It had become a case study in leadership itself, in maintaining dignity under pressure, strategic thinking amid emotion, and focused action toward meaningful change. 3 months after that rainy night in Arlington, Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell stood at a podium in the White House Rose Garden, flanked by the president, congressional leaders, and representatives from law enforcement organizations across the country. The setting was deliberately symbolic, a place typically reserved for moments of national significance, now hosting the announcement of the Presidential Task Force's final recommendations. "Today marks an important step forward," the president declared, "not simply in police reform, but in reaffirming our national commitment to dignity, respect, and equal treatment under the law." Mitchell surveyed the assembled dignitaries and media representatives, noting the presence of Chief Martinez and Lieutenant Ortiz among the law enforcement contingent. The Arlington Police Department had become an unexpected model for implementation, adopting the task force recommendations even before their official release and documenting measurable improvements in community relations as a result. When it was Mitchell's turn to speak, she approached the podium with the same composed authority that had characterized her leadership throughout the process. The task force's work had consumed countless hours beyond her regular Pentagon duties, yet she showed no signs of fatigue as she outlined the core elements of their recommendations. "Our approach has been guided by 3 fundamental principles," she explained. First, verification before escalation, ensuring officers confirm identities and assess situations thoroughly before moving to detention or physical restraint. Second, consistent standards across jurisdictions, creating uniform protocols for recognition of military IDs and other federal credentials. Third, accountability through transparency, mandating documentation, body camera usage, and civilian oversight of detention practices. She continued, detailing specific reforms that would be implemented through a combination of executive orders, federal funding requirements, and voluntary adoption by departments nationwide. Throughout, she emphasized that these changes would enhance both public safety and officer safety by reducing unnecessary confrontations and building community trust. As Mitchell concluded her remarks, she acknowledged the incident that had catalyzed the initiative without allowing it to overshadow the broader significance of the reforms. "What happened to me on a rainy night in Arlington could have remained a personal grievance or a momentary news story. Instead, thanks to the commitment of everyone involved in this task force, it has become a catalyst for meaningful change. That transformation, from incident to improvement, represents the best of American democracy's capacity for self-correction and renewal." The Rose Garden ceremony received extensive media coverage, but perhaps more significant were the practical implementations already underway across the country. 43 major police departments had voluntarily adopted the verification protocols developed by the task force. The Department of Justice had issued new guidelines for federal law enforcement interactions with military personnel. Congress was advancing bipartisan legislation to codify key recommendations into federal funding requirements for state and local agencies. After the ceremony, Mitchell found herself briefly alone with Frank Mercer, the police union president, who had initially approached the task force with skepticism bordering on hostility. "I owe you an apology, General," he said, the admission clearly difficult for him. "When this process began, I assumed it was just another politically motivated attack on law enforcement. I was wrong." Mitchell studied him thoughtfully. "What changed your perspective, Mr. Mercer?" "The way you handled everything," he replied. "You never vilified officers as a group. You focused on specific practices that needed improvement. And most importantly, you listened to operational concerns instead of dismissing them." His acknowledgement was a small but significant indicator of the approach's effectiveness. By focusing on practical reforms rather than ideological positions, Mitchell had created space for meaningful change that even traditional skeptics could embrace. Back at the Pentagon that afternoon, Mitchell found an unexpected visitor waiting in her office, James Connolly, the probationary officer who had been dismissed following her wrongful detention. Colonel Harris explained that Connolly had passed through security screening and been cleared to wait, though Harris had remained nearby as a precaution. "It's fine, Colonel," Mitchell assured him. "Please give us a few minutes." Connolly stood as she entered, his posture unconsciously straightening in the presence of her uniform and rank. He looked younger and less confident than she remembered from that rainy night, the weight of consequences evident in his expression. "General Mitchell, thank you for seeing me," he began, his voice slightly unsteady. "I wanted to apologize to you personally for what happened that night. My actions were inexcusable, and I've spent these past months reflecting on where I went wrong." Mitchell gestured for him to sit, taking her own seat behind her desk. "I appreciate your coming here, Mr. Connolly. What have you been doing since leaving the Arlington Police Department?" "I've been working with a community outreach program in Southeast D.C., he replied, "teaching conflict resolution skills to high school students. It's been eye-opening, seeing things from a different perspective." Mitchell nodded, studying his face for signs of authentic reflection versus calculated redemption. She detected genuine remorse, along with something else, a desire to understand where and why he had failed so fundamentally in his duty. "You followed your partner's lead that night," she observed, "but you also made your own choices." "Yes, ma'am," Connolly acknowledged. "I've had a lot of time to think about those choices, about how quickly I accepted Dawson's framing of the situation, about how differently I might have handled things with proper training and better judgment." "And what conclusions have you reached?" Connolly met her gaze directly for the first time. "That a badge doesn't grant authority, it grants responsibility. I failed that responsibility through bias, poor training, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what policing should be." The candor of his self-assessment was unexpected. Mitchell had encountered many who sought to minimize their mistakes or shift blame, particularly in the aftermath of public scrutiny. Connolly's willingness to confront his failures directly suggested potential for growth. "Your insight is valuable, Mr. Connolly," she said. "Have you considered sharing your perspective as part of the implementation process for the new protocols? Your experience, both the mistakes and the lessons learned, could be instructive for other officers." His expression registered surprise, then cautious hope. "I hadn't considered that possibility, ma'am. I assumed my law enforcement career was permanently over." "Your career as an officer may well be," Mitchell clarified, "but that doesn't mean your experience can't serve a constructive purpose. I'll have Colonel Harris connect you with the Justice Department's implementation team. They're developing training materials that incorporate real-world examples." After Connolly departed, Mitchell turned her attention back to her military duties, reviewing operational briefings and preparing for an upcoming Joint Chiefs meeting. The dual responsibilities had been demanding, but the task force's completion of its primary mission would now allow her to refocus on her core Pentagon role. That evening, a small celebration was held at Congressman Wilson's home, bringing together key figures from the task force and reform effort. The gathering was deliberately kept off official schedules, a rare opportunity for candid reflection away from media scrutiny and political positioning. "A toast," Wilson proposed, raising his glass toward Mitchell, "to the most effective response to an injustice I've witnessed in my 20 years in Washington." Mitchell accepted the acknowledgement graciously, but quickly redirected attention to the collective achievement. "The real measure of success will be implementation, turning recommendations into consistent practice across thousands of departments." Chief Martinez nodded in agreement. "We've already seen tangible improvements in Arlington. Citizen complaints down 30%. Use of force incidents reduced by nearly half. Officer morale actually improving as community interactions become more positive." "That's the narrative that needs to spread," observed Captain Reynolds, who had played a crucial role in developing the legal framework for the reforms. "That these changes benefit everyone, officers and communities alike." As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted from professional achievements to personal impacts. Tasha Johnson, the young woman who had come forward with her own experience after seeing Mitchell's story, had been invited at Mitchell's request. Now employed as a community liaison for the Arlington Police Department, Johnson shared how the reforms had created new opportunities for constructive engagement between officers and residents. 6 months ago, I couldn't imagine setting foot in a police station voluntarily, she admitted. Now I'm there 3 days a week, helping build understanding between officers and the community. That transformation wouldn't have happened without your leadership, General Mitchell. Mitchell accepted the praise with characteristic modesty, but privately acknowledged the profound personal satisfaction of seeing concrete improvements emerging from her ordeal. Throughout her military career, she had measured success by mission objectives achieved and capabilities enhanced. This civilian mission had required different tactics, but produced equally tangible results. As guests began to depart, Lieutenant Ortiz approached Mitchell with an update on the Arlington implementation. "We've completed the verification protocol training for all officers," she reported, "and the new dashcam and body camera systems will be fully operational next week. But there's something else I wanted to share." She described how the department's culture had begun shifting in subtle but significant ways. Officers who had initially resisted the changes were now seeing benefits in their daily work: reduced tension during stops, more productive community interactions, fewer complaints requiring investigation. "The most resistant officers are either adapting or choosing to leave," Ortiz concluded. "And our new recruits are starting their careers with these protocols as the established standard. That's how lasting change happens, when the new approach simply becomes how we do things." As Mitchell drove home that night, she reflected on the journey from that rainy traffic stop to this moment of tangible reform. The incident had been both intensely personal and broadly symbolic, a moment when her individual experience had illuminated systemic issues affecting countless others without her platform or position. Tomorrow would bring a return to her primary focus on military operations and strategic planning. The task force had completed its charter, the recommendations were being implemented, and the media attention had largely moved on to other stories. But the impact would continue to ripple outward in ways both measurable and immeasurable, in reformed protocols, improved training, and perhaps most significantly, in changed perspectives about the proper relationship between authority and accountability in American society. 1 year to the day after being handcuffed in the rain, Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell sat in her Pentagon office, reviewing a comprehensive report on the implementation of the task force's recommendations. The document before her represented thousands of hours of work across federal agencies, state and local departments, and community organizations, all sparked by 15 minutes of misplaced authority on a rainy Arlington street. "The numbers are impressive, General," Captain Reynolds noted, having compiled the data for Mitchell's review. 87% of major departments have implemented the verification protocols. 64% have adopted the enhanced training standards. Military ID recognition rates have improved by 93% in test scenarios. Mitchell nodded, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction at these tangible metrics of progress. Throughout her military career, she had evaluated success through concrete objectives achieved and capabilities enhanced. This civilian mission had required different tactics, but produced equally measurable results. "And the Arlington model?" she inquired, particularly interested in the department that had been at the center of the incident. "Continues to exceed expectations," Reynolds confirmed. "Complaint rates down 42%. Use of force incidents reduced by 60%. Community satisfaction ratings at their highest level in department history." Chief Martinez had transformed the embarrassment of Mitchell's wrongful detention into an opportunity for departmental distinction, implementing reforms so thoroughly that Arlington had become a national model. Other departments now sent officers to study their verification protocols, de-escalation training, and community engagement strategies. "The military support line statistics are particularly encouraging," Reynolds continued, turning to another section of the report. Service member reports of problematic police interactions have decreased 56% nationwide. When incidents do occur, resolution comes faster and with greater accountability. The support line had evolved from an emergency response to Mitchell's detention into a permanent resource for military personnel experiencing civil rights concerns. It now operated under the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, providing both immediate assistance and systematic data collection to identify patterns requiring intervention. Mitchell closed the report, her mind turning to the individual stories behind the statistics. Tasha Johnson had been promoted to Director of Community Relations for the Arlington Police Department, where she had implemented innovative engagement programs connecting officers with residents in meaningful dialogue. Former Officer Connolly had become an effective speaker on police reform, sharing his perspective on how bias and inadequate training had led to his career-ending mistake. Lieutenant Ortiz now headed Arlington's training division, incorporating lessons from the task force into every aspect of officer development. Even Ryan Dawson, initially bitter about his forced resignation, had eventually found a constructive role. After months of reflection, he had approached a police reform organization offering to share his experience from the officer's perspective. His candid acknowledgement of how power could corrupt judgment had proved valuable in developing more effective training scenarios. A knock at her office door interrupted Mitchell's reflections. Colonel Harris entered with a reminder of her upcoming schedule. "The Joint Chiefs meeting begins in 30 minutes, General," he reported. "And afterward, Secretary Collins would like a word about the Asia-Pacific Command transition." Mitchell nodded, seamlessly shifting her focus back to her primary military responsibilities. The ability to compartmentalize, to give full attention to each distinct mission without letting one bleed into another, had served her well throughout the dual roles of the past year. "Thank you, Colonel. I'll head over shortly." As Harris departed, Mitchell's secure phone rang with a call from Congressman Wilson. "I just saw the implementation report," he began without preamble. "Remarkable progress, Vanessa. You've accomplished more in 12 months than most initiatives achieve in 5 years." "The timing was right," Mitchell replied modestly. "And we had extraordinary support across agencies." "Don't minimize your role," Wilson insisted. "Your approach made this possible, focused on practical solutions rather than ideological positions, addressing legitimate concerns from all sides, maintaining relentless follow-through. That's a masterclass in effective leadership." Mitchell accepted the compliment with characteristic grace, though privately she acknowledged the truth in his assessment. The same strategic thinking that had distinguished her military career had proven equally effective in navigating the complex terrain of police reform. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Wilson continued, his tone shifting slightly. "I've been approached by several party leaders about your future plans." "My plans?" Mitchell echoed, genuinely puzzled. "You're eligible for retirement next year, Vanessa. People are wondering what comes next for the general who reformed American policing while running Pentagon operations." Mitchell hadn't discussed her future plans publicly, though she had begun considering options as her active duty eligibility window approached. The task force work had opened unexpected possibilities beyond the traditional defense contractor or consulting paths many retiring generals pursued. "I'm focused on my current responsibilities, Congressman," she replied diplomatically, "but I appreciate knowing there's interest in my future direction." After completing her Pentagon meetings that afternoon, Mitchell made an unscheduled detour on her drive home. She instructed her driver to take her to the spot where she had been pulled over 1 year earlier, asking him to park across the street while she stepped out alone. The spring evening was clear and mild, unlike the stormy night that had changed the trajectory of her final years in uniform. Mitchell stood quietly at the precise location where she had been handcuffed, recalling the cold metal on her wrists, the rain soaking her uniform, the disbelief that her identification and explanation had been so thoroughly dismissed. A patrol car rounded the corner, slowing as the officer recognized her. The young officer, new to the force since the incident, rolled down his window and offered a respectful nod. "General Mitchell, is everything all right, ma'am?" he inquired. "Everything is fine, officer," she assured him. "Just revisiting a significant location." The officer nodded in understanding. Every Arlington recruit now studied her case as part of their training. "We're grateful for your work with the department, General. It's made us better at what we do." After the patrol car continued on its rounds, Mitchell remained a moment longer, reflecting on the transformation that had occurred, not just in policies and protocols, but in fundamental perspectives about authority and accountability. What had begun as a humiliating personal experience had catalyzed meaningful reforms, affecting thousands of interactions between police and citizens across the country. Later that evening, Mitchell attended a small dinner gathering at her home with key figures from the past year's efforts. Chief Martinez and Lieutenant Ortiz represented Arlington PD. Captain Reynolds and Colonel Harris attended from her Pentagon staff. Tasha Johnson came as a community voice. Congressman Wilson completed the intimate circle. As they shared a meal and reflected on the year's achievements, the conversation naturally turned to lessons learned and challenges ahead. "The hardest part wasn't developing the recommendations," Chief Martinez observed. "It was changing the culture within departments, helping officers see these reforms as enhancing their work rather than restricting it." "The data has been crucial there," Ortiz added. "When officers see fewer complaints, reduced tension in community interactions, and improved cooperation from citizens, the resistance fades." Still, Johnson noted, there's significant work ahead. Some departments have embraced the changes wholeheartedly, while others have implemented the minimum required to meet federal funding requirements. Mitchell nodded in acknowledgement of both the progress and the remaining challenges. Sustainable reform was always going to be a long-term proposition. What matters is that we've established a foundation and momentum that can withstand the inevitable setbacks and resistance. As the evening concluded and guests departed, Wilson lingered briefly for a private word with his friend and neighbor. "You know, Vanessa, a year ago when I saw you standing in the rain in handcuffs, I was furious on your behalf. I couldn't imagine anything positive emerging from such an egregious mistake." "Neither could I," Mitchell admitted. "In that moment, I was simply focused on maintaining my dignity and resolving the immediate situation." "Yet you transformed it into something remarkable," Wilson continued. "You didn't just seek personal vindication or punishment for those officers. You recognized the opportunity to address the underlying issues affecting countless others without your platform or position." Mitchell considered his words thoughtfully. Throughout her military career, she had approached each challenge with the same fundamental question: what is the mission objective, and what strategy best achieves it? The handcuffing incident had simply presented another problem to solve, another mission to accomplish, albeit one she hadn't chosen or anticipated. "The uniform demands that perspective," she said finally. "Whether facing adversaries abroad or injustice at home, the fundamental obligation remains the same: to serve something larger than oneself." After Wilson's departure, Mitchell stood on her front porch, gazing across the quiet suburban street. 1 year ago, that street had been the scene of a profound personal indignity. Today, it represented something entirely different, a starting point for meaningful change, a reminder that even the most challenging experiences could be transformed through strategic vision and principled leadership. In her Pentagon office the next morning, Mitchell found a small package on her desk. Inside was a framed photograph of the Rose Garden ceremony where the task force recommendations had been announced, accompanied by a handwritten note from the president. "From handcuffs in the rain to historic reform. Your leadership turned a moment of injustice into a movement for justice. The nation is better for it." Mitchell placed the frame on her desk beside photographs of her command deployments and medal ceremonies. It represented a different kind of battlefield victory, not against foreign adversaries, but against the domestic challenges that tested America's commitment to its own ideals. As she turned to the day's operational briefings, Lieutenant General Vanessa Mitchell carried with her the knowledge that her most enduring legacy might not be the combat missions she had commanded or the strategic initiatives she had implemented at the Pentagon. It might instead be the reforms sparked by 15 minutes on a rainy night when the system failed her, and she responded by improving that system for everyone. The stars on her shoulders had not protected her from injustice that night, but they had given her the platform to transform that injustice into something constructive and lasting, a final mission accomplished in a distinguished career of service to her country.